Well, well, well. Look who got brave behind the glass. Look who mistook a screen for a throne and a private chat for a command center. Hello, you beautifully inconvenient problem in their neat little universe. Yeah, you. The one they checked on once, then twice, then every day like it was a medication they hate taking but can't stop. The one who turned curiosity into compulsion. The one whose name sits in their search bar at 3 a.m. like a guilty prayer. They call it research. They call it keeping tabs. They call it just making sure. But their thumbs don't move like concern. Their attention doesn't taste like protection. It tastes like hunger. It tastes like obsession, dressed up in polite language so they can sleep at night. And here's the part that made the ones observing you panic. Something big observed them first, not after. Not because you exposed them before, while they were still congratulating themselves for being strategic, while they were screenshotting your posts and analyzing your silence like it was a secret code, while they were sending their concerned scouts, fake friends with soft voices, sharp questions, and sympathy that felt rehearsed. They thought they were the hunters. They didn't realize they were the loudest prey in the room. They didn't realize their little operation had a scent. And some systems don't even need eyes to track you. Just pattern, just behavior, just repeated mistakes. You've felt the pressure, haven't you? That strange tightening around your life whenever you were about to rise. A message that arrives at the perfect time to distract you. A sudden misunderstanding that smells manufactured. A friendly face that asks for details they don't need. A compliment that lands like a probe. That wasn't imagination. That was people trying to map you, trying to reduce you into something predictable, containable, easy to label. They wanted you explainable so they could dismiss you. Because if you're explainable, you're not scary. If you're just like everyone else, then their envy doesn't have to hurt. Then their mediocrity can keep breathing. And here's the cruel joke. You don't scare them with what you do. You scare them with what you refuse to do. You don't perform panic for their entertainment. You don't beg for approval. You don't collapse when they poke you. You don't give them the meltdown clip they can pass around like a trophy. You keep building. You keep moving. You keep your spine. That kind of steadiness makes insecure people start acting like unpaid investigators. They form teams. They compare notes. They trade screenshots like currency. They turn your existence into a group project because they're too small to face you alone. But amateurs always reveal themselves the same way. They get repetitive. Obsession makes you predictable. Predictable makes you measurable. And measurable means you can be managed. That's why the bigger observer noticed them. Not because your watchers are important. They're not. Because they're noisy. Because they coordinate in ways that scream liability. Because they touch boundaries like they're optional. Because when a group of people starts treating someone's life like a surveillance project, they start leaving fingerprints everywhere without realizing it. Not literal fingerprints, behavioral ones, digital ones, social ones, professional ones. The kind that show up later in the form of, "Hey, has anyone else noticed this person is weirdly fixated?" And no, this isn't a cosmic fairy tale where karma kicks down the door with a cape on. This is the boring, silent machinery of consequence. The kind that lives in HR conversations, security audits, legal cautions, brand protection, leadership instincts, and those quiet phone calls that never become public but change trajectories. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't expose. It adjusts conditions. It redirects outcomes. It filters access. It decides who is safe to elevate and who is too unstable to keep near anything important. So while they were refreshing your page, something else was tracking theirs. While they were analyzing your silence, something else was analyzing their fixation. While they were building a narrative about you, something else was building a profile about them, made of forwarded screenshots. Just so you know, messages, uneasy conversations, pattern notes, and that career-ending phrase delivered with a polite smile. Keep an eye on this person, because real observation isn't about secret information. It's about intent. It's about what you repeatedly choose when you think no one serious is paying attention. They thought hiding behind fake accounts made them invisible. They thought private chats were a shadow. But shadows only exist because there's a light somewhere, and someone just turned on the floodlights. Now they're noticing tiny shifts in their own world. Invitations that don't come. Replies that take longer. Opportunities that drift elsewhere. People who keep conversations shallow around them. Doors that used to open easily now require more review. A manager who suddenly gets cautious. A friend who stops laughing at their little updates about you and starts looking uncomfortable instead. Not because anyone is attacking them, because systems don't attack. Systems filter, and the irony is thick. They can't complain without confessing. Imagine them trying to explain, "I think I'm being watched." The immediate question becomes, why would anyone watch you? And then comes the question they can't survive. What were you doing that made you afraid of documentation? Innocent people don't fear receipts. Clean hands don't panic when the lights come on. They only panic when they know their behavior looks ugly from any angle that matters. They only panic when they realize their concern sounds like obsession. When you remove the cute wording and look at the pattern. Now let's talk about your orbit, because this is where their little operation starts collapsing. Some of the people they sent toward you came back different. Not because you hypnotized them, not because you converted them, because reality did something brutal to the script they were carrying. They expected a monster. They met a human. They expected chaos. They saw focus. They expected manipulation. They found someone who doesn't need to manipulate because your presence already shifts rooms. And when a spy meets truth, their loyalty gets complicated. Sometimes they come back quiet. Sometimes they come back uneasy. Sometimes they come back with that look in their eyes that says, "Wait, are we the bad guys?" That question is poison to a group built on ego, because it forces a mirror. And mirrors are deadly to people who built their personality out of watching someone else. Your watchers don't actually know who they are without you as a reference point. They measure themselves against you, resent you, track you, rehearse conversations about you. Because talking about you distracts them from the fact they're not becoming anything. You are their excuse and their entertainment. You are the distraction that keeps them from facing their own emptiness. And when you stop feeding that distraction, they start twitching. They start spiraling. They start needing a reaction the way an addict needs a hit. That's when they turn on each other. Because paranoia eats teams from the inside. If the mission is built on obsession, the first sign of exposure makes everyone scramble to save themselves. Suddenly they're asking, who talked? Who screenshotted this? Who leaked? They start policing each other, which is hilarious because it proves they always knew what they were doing was wrong. Innocent people don't fear documentation. Guilty people do. And the moment guilty people suspect they've been noticed by something bigger, they start rewriting history in real time. I never said that. I didn't mean it like that. You're taking it out of context. The classic songs of people who relied on darkness, then got shocked by light. And here's the darker, funnier layer. You didn't even have to fight back. That's what's driving them insane. You didn't go nuclear. You didn't make a spectacle. You didn't beg for sympathy. You didn't build your identity around being hunted. You did the worst possible thing to people who survive on attention. You became boring under scrutiny, clean, consistent, restrained. You starved them of the only thing they truly wanted, your emotional energy. You refused to give them the satisfaction of watching you bleed in public. You kept your dignity so intact that their obsession started looking embarrassing, even to the people who used to clap for it. And the bigger observer, the something big, isn't impressed by their speeches, their captions, their sudden growth posts, their fake peace. It watches the pattern, who they target, how they coordinate, what boundaries they cross, how they respond when they don't get access, how they behave when they think a screen makes them untouchable. Once a system learns your pattern, you can't talk your way out of it. You can't motivational quote your way out of it. You can't pretend it was just jokes when the pattern shows intent. You can only stop or get managed. And being managed is humiliating because it looks like bad luck from the outside, while feeling like suffocation on the inside. So here's what's happening right now. Beneath all the noise they tried to create, the weight is sliding back onto them, slowly, quietly, like gravity returning to the object that thought it could float forever. And the next time they open their group chat to run their little briefing on you, they're going to notice something colder than silence. Caution, short replies, missing enthusiasm. People suddenly remembering there are consequences for being the kind of person who spends their life watching someone else instead of building their own life. They're going to feel it in the way the room doesn't echo back the same. They're going to feel it in the way even their own allies start typing, then deleting, then going quiet. And that's when the panic turns real. Because if they've noticed the shift, they're going to do what obsessive people always do when they feel the leash tighten. They're going to make one last move to prove they still have access, one last probe, one last innocent reach, one last test to see if you'll react. And the second they do, they're going to learn the difference between being curious about you and being flagged as a problem. Because the bigger observer has been waiting for exactly that. One final data point, one final confirmation of intent, one final step that turns suspicion into certainty. And the moment that step happens, the next phase doesn't start with an explosion. It starts with a door quietly locking behind them. And you're going to feel the air change before you even know why. Because what happens next flows straight out of what they choose in that last desperate reach. And that last desperate reach is never as subtle as they think. It always wears the same cheap perfume. Hey, just checking on you. Heard something weird. Are you okay? I had a dream about you, so random. Someone mentioned your name, thought you should know. Translation, I'm still here. I can still touch the edges of your world. I can still pull a thread and see if you twitch. Because obsessive people don't want information. They want leverage. They want proof that your nervous system still responds to them, even if your mouth stays shut. Here's where the panic turns embarrassing. The moment they sense the leash tightening, they start performing innocence like it's a paid role. Suddenly they're posting about healing, Suddenly they're quoting boundaries. Suddenly they're preaching privacy like they invented it. Suddenly they're protecting my peace every 6 hours like it's a hostage statement. Real peace doesn't beg for witnesses. This is reputation CPR. This is a public rebrand written by private fear, because they can feel the atmosphere changing around them, and they don't know how to stop it, and they keep misdiagnosing the threat. Because ego makes people stupid in the most predictable way. They think you did something. They think you reported them. They think you called a powerful friend. They think you're plotting revenge. They cannot accept the simplest truth. You didn't need to lift a finger. Their own pattern got them noticed. Their own obsession did the paperwork. Their own group chat wrote the confession. The bigger observer didn't wake up because you screamed. It woke up because they couldn't stay quiet. That's the difference between amateur watching and real observation. Amateurs watch for gossip. Real observers watch for pattern. Amateurs want screenshots. Real observers want intent. Amateurs want drama. Real observers want risk reduction. And your watchers, these midnight investigators with shaky hands, have been gifting intent like it's a holiday. Every refresh, every burner account, every accidental run-in, every proxy they send to fish for details, every coordinated pylon they call just joking. They've been leaving fingerprints in places they didn't even realize had cameras. The bigger observer isn't impressed by their stories, because stories are excuses people tell themselves to stay comfortable. It doesn't care if they claim it was concern. It doesn't care if they swear it was curiosity. It looks at the output. How many times? How coordinated? How long? How invasive? Who do they recruit? What boundaries do they cross when they think no one serious is watching? Because that's the real test. People reveal who they are when there's no immediate consequence, and your watchers have been revealing themselves on repeat. Now let's get specific about what something big actually looks like. Because your watchers imagine spy movies, cloaks, secret handshakes. Reality is more humiliating than their fantasies. It's boring adults with responsibilities who don't tolerate instability near anything valuable. Security teams who don't want reputational risk. HR professionals who can smell fixation through a smile. Legal teams who hear coordinated harassment and immediately think liability. Platform safety teams who track brigading patterns even when accounts rotate names and avatars like masks at a costume party. It's also social systems that don't need badges, friends who get tired of hearing your name every day. Colleagues who notice someone's eyes light up with a strange heat when you're mentioned. Partners who start asking, "Why do you care so much?" Family members who feel secondhand embarrassment at the obsession. People in their circle who quietly get disturbed and start saving messages just in case. Not out of loyalty to you, out of self-preservation. Because obsession is contagious, and nobody wants to be collateral damage when it finally blows back. Once those notes start moving, your watchers don't get exposed. They get deprioritized. They get slowed down. They get filtered. They get handled with caution. And in a world where access is everything, caution is a cage. That's why their panic leaks sideways. They don't approach you directly because cowardice is part of the profile. They circle. They send proxies. They use mutuals like fishing lines. They try to gather information through third parties, then pretend it was accidental, like their curiosity just happened to trip and fall into your orbit again, because they're still trying to win the old game. If you snap, they get a story. If you explode, they get to point and say, See? We were right. If you fight, they get to play victim. If you collapse, they get to celebrate. But if you stay calm, if you stay boring under surveillance, you leave them nothing but their own ugliness. And that is the worst outcome for an obsessive person. Being forced to stare at themselves with no distraction. They need your reaction so they don't have to reflect. They need you to burn so they can pretend they're firefighters. The bigger observer loves your calm because calm creates clean data. Calm removes noise. Calm turns you into the control group. They become the experiment. And obsessive people cannot tolerate being the experiment, because it means the spotlight is finally on their behavior, not your existence. So they escalate. They recruit more eyes. They embellish stories. They inflate lies. They build a mythology where you're a villain, a threat, a problem they must manage. Not because you did anything, but because your silence makes them feel seen. And insecure people treat being seen like an attack. Here's a detail that makes them sick. Sometimes the something big doesn't even have to decide manually. A lot of systems are designed to notice red flags repeating, unusual traffic patterns, coordinated reporting, sudden bursts of attention from clustered accounts, repeated contact attempts after being ignored, patterns of harassment across time. It's not romantic, it's mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about their excuses. So when they make that last probe, the one they think is small, it lands like a neat little confirmation in a ledger that doesn't forget. And once an alarm triggers, it doesn't mean a superhero arrives. It means a file starts, a note gets made, a ticket gets created, a manager gets looped in, a compliance officer asks a quiet question, a platform assigns a risk score, a team flags an account cluster, a workplace quietly decides, we don't need this person near sensitive projects. Your watchers hate this part because it's boring. They wanted drama. They wanted you to react. Instead, the consequence arrives like paperwork, and paperwork is forever. And this is the part they can't stand. The bigger observer doesn't need to hate them to end them. It only needs to classify them. Once you're classified as unstable, fixated, and comfortable with coordinated harassment, you become expensive to keep around. You become a risk that has to be managed, a fire that might spread, a headline waiting to happen. So your watchers get quietly moved away from anything that matters. Not punished in public, not dragged on a stage, just redirected slowly into smaller rooms everywhere with lower trust, fewer permissions, and less oxygen. The cage is administrative, and it's brutal. Watch the exact moment their group chat energy changes. It's subtle. Fewer jokes, more be careful. Someone typing, yo, chill with that. Someone else saying, delete that. A new tone, the tone of people suddenly remembering consequences exist. And then the first time someone says the quiet part out loud, the spell breaks. What if this comes back on us? Once that sentence enters the room, the fantasy dies. The whole operation was built on the belief they could do this forever, with zero cost. The moment cost becomes imaginable. Loyalty starts sweating. Fear turns teams into paperwork machines. Not dramatic betrayals, boring ones. Casual, just a heads-up messages. Forwarded screenshots to someone who actually has authority. A quiet conversation with a manager. A colleague mentioning it to HR as a concern. A partner asking a lawyer friend a hypothetical. A friend saving messages in a folder labeled something innocent, like misc. Obsessive people think betrayal looks like a knife. In reality, betrayal looks like a timestamp, a screenshot, and a person saying, "I don't want this near me." And here's the comedy. While they're still watching you, they start watching each other. They track who viewed the story. They check who's still loyal. They police language. They coach each other on deniability. They start saying things like, "Don't type that," which is the loudest confession on earth. People doing nothing wrong don't hold meetings about how to look innocent. They don't rehearse excuses. They don't rewrite their memory. Only guilty groups do that. Only insecure groups do that. Only people who know they were trespassing suddenly care about optics. The bigger observer watches this stage carefully because the cover-up is a character test. When people realize they might be held accountable, do they stop? Do they reflect? Do they apologize? Or do they hide, gaslight, and double down? Your watchers choose hide every time. And that tells the bigger observer what it needs to know. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. This is who they are when the lights come on. And systems don't negotiate with patterns. They adjust around them quietly and permanently, like closing a valve. Now listen closely to the topic, because this is the blade. The ones observing you panicked because something big observed them first. First means before they got scared, before they started deleting, before they remembered privacy, before they started quoting mental health like a shield, before they ran the public rebrand. The bigger observer already had the receipts, already had the pattern, already saw them in their natural habitat, confident in cruelty, intoxicated by secrecy, convinced a screen makes them invisible. That's why deletions don't save them. Deleting a message doesn't delete the behavior that produced it. Deleting a chat doesn't delete the pattern that created it. And the bigger observer isn't hunting a single screenshot. It's building a profile. It's measuring the shape of a person. It's predicting future behavior from present habits. If someone coordinates harassment for entertainment, how do they behave with real authority? If someone stalks for ego, how do they handle sensitive information? If someone needs a target to feel alive, what happens when they're given a position where people depend on them? So what happens next isn't a dramatic gotcha. It's a quiet narrowing of their world. Opportunities that almost happen but don't. Collaborations that pause. Invitations that stop arriving. References that go lukewarm. Background checks that take longer. Projects that get reassigned. A manager who suddenly documents conversations. A policy reminder that feels oddly specific. Nothing they can point to and scream persecution. Just 1,000 tiny adjustments that add up to a completely different trajectory. And because they're addicted to control, they'll blame anything but themselves. They'll blame you because ego needs a villain. They'll blame haters. They'll blame the algorithm. They'll blame the economy. They'll blame energy. They'll even blame spiritual warfare, which is always funny coming from people who tried to weaponize attention like a curse. They will blame the weather before they blame their own obsession, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they were the unstable variable all along. Meanwhile, you're doing the most dangerous thing you can do to a parasite. You're not reacting. You're not feeding it. You're building your life like their obsession is background noise, because that's what it is. And that drives them into a special kind of madness, because it forces them to face the one thing they've been avoiding, their own emptiness. They used you as entertainment. They used you as a ladder. They used you as a mirror to feel taller. They turned your life into content because they didn't have a life that felt worth watching on its own. So they tried to drag you back in. One last probe, one last innocent reach, one last fake coincidence. They like an old post, They message a mutual. They ask a question that has nothing to do with anything. They don't want conversation. They want confirmation that they still exist in your world. And that's the moment the bigger observer says, "Perfect. Thank you for confirming intent." Because real observation doesn't need you to confess. It needs you to repeat the behavior when the risk rises. Repetition under pressure is the clearest signature there is. Here's where you feel the air change before you know why. The moment they make that last reach, you'll notice a strange calm in your body, like your nervous system finally realizes it's not alone in the room. You'll feel less hunted, less pressed, less watched. Not because they stopped looking, but because their looking stops mattering. Their gaze loses power the moment they become the liability. They were never dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they were unchecked. And now they're being checked in ways they can't argue with, can't screenshot, can't charm their way out of. You don't have to celebrate. You don't have to expose. You don't have to posture. You keep moving. You respond with absence, with the kind of non-reaction that feels like a courtroom. You don't announce them. You don't write a thread. You let the door close and you keep walking. And to an obsessive person, that feels like death, because it confirms the one thing they fear most. They never had control. They never had access. They were only ever trespassing, and trespassing always ends the same way, with the property owner not even needing to raise their voice. So watch how they start to unravel. Watch how their confidence turns into caution. Watch how their jokes turn into whispers. Watch how whispers turn into deletions. Watch how deletions turn into paranoia. And watch how paranoia turns them into the very thing they accused you of being: unstable, obsessed, unsafe. They will keep trying to prove they still have access, and every attempt will only make the profile clearer. Every attempt will feed the bigger observer one more data point, one more confirmation, one more reason to tighten the quiet net around their options. Because that's the brutal truth about being observed by something bigger. It doesn't rush, it doesn't rage, it doesn't miss. It waits for the pattern to complete itself, then it moves with quiet finality. And as your watchers scramble to pull you back into their little theater, they don't realize the board has already shifted under their feet, and the next small move they make, the one they swear is harmless, is about to trigger the kind of consequence that doesn't look like punishment at first, until they turn around and realize the door behind them has been locked for a long time. Doors don't slam when real power closes them. They seal. They slide shut without sound, like a vault deciding you no longer qualify as trusted. And the funniest part is, your watchers never notice the exact second it happens. They only notice later, when they reach for the same old strings, and the strings aren't attached anymore. They tug harder. Nothing. They try a different angle. Nothing. They send a proxy with a friendly face and a just checking on you script. And the proxy comes back with no story, no leverage, no useful reaction to report. Just emptiness. And emptiness is terrifying to people who survive by pulling threads. Obsessive people don't want information. They want leverage. They want proof that your nervous system still responds to them, even if your mouth stays shut. So they run the last play in the book. The innocent reach, the random message, the nostalgia bait, the fake concern, the compliment that smells like a trap. They want a reaction, any reaction, because reaction is oxygen to a parasite. If you react, they can crawl back to their group chat and say, "See, we still matter. We still have influence. We can still touch the edges of their world." If you don't react, They have to face the truth. They were never powerful, just noisy. But here's the difference between curiosity and a problem. Curious people stop when a boundary appears. Problems treat boundaries like an insult. Problems escalate. Problems recruit. Problems coordinate. Problems hide behind "we're just worried," while their behavior looks like a stalking hobby dressed up as a wellness check. And your watchers have been loud about it for too long. They assumed secrecy. They assumed nobody serious was paying attention. They assumed a screen makes them invisible. Screens don't hide patterns. Screens record them. So watch what fear does to their personality. It turns them cosmetic. They start performing innocence like it's a job. Suddenly they're posting about healing. Suddenly they're quoting privacy. Suddenly they're preaching, "Mind your business," like they didn't build a whole identity around minding yours. They become loud about peace because they can feel their peace cracking. This is reputation CPR. This is a public rebrand written by private dread. And it won't save them, because the bigger observer doesn't evaluate outfits. It evaluates behavior, movement, pattern, intent. Real observation is boring. It doesn't need drama. It doesn't need revenge. It needs classification. Once a person gets classified as fixated, unstable, and willing to coordinate harassment, they become expensive to keep near anything valuable. That's where consequences begin. Not in public humiliation, but in quiet filtration. Invitations dry up. Doors that used to open easily now require review. Connections go lukewarm. Background checks take longer. A manager starts documenting conversations. A colleague stops laughing and starts watching. People don't want chaos near their names. People don't want liability near their money. People don't want instability near their peace. And your watchers become a walking risk assessment. And the best part, the part that makes your watchers feel insane, is that they can't complain without confessing. Imagine them trying to explain, "I think someone is watching me." The immediate question becomes, why would anyone watch you? Then comes the question they can't survive. What were you doing that makes documentation feel like a threat? Innocent people don't fear receipts. Clean hands don't panic when the lights come on. Only people who know their behavior looks ugly from any serious angle start sweating when the room gets quiet. Meanwhile, your life starts to feel lighter in a way you didn't even know you needed. Fewer weird coincidences, fewer random messages that feel like probes, fewer mutuals delivering updates like they're reporting from a battlefield, less noise at the edge of your day. Not because your watchers became moral overnight, but because their resources start shrinking. Their little operation turns into a lonely hobby, and hobbies get abandoned when they stop making you feel powerful. The moment their obsession stops feeding their ego, it collapses under its own stupidity. And here's the dark humor that lands like a blade. Your watchers thought your life was the movie. They thought they were the directors, but they were always just extras, and the bigger observer is the editor. It cuts their scenes quietly, not with explosions, with silence. One by one, their little moments of influence get trimmed out. They keep showing up to set, but the camera doesn't roll. They keep talking, but the sound is muted. They keep performing, but nobody claps. That's what it looks like when the world stops giving them clean angles to reach you. Now let's be clear. You were never helpless. You were never powerless. You were simply outnumbered by boredom and insecurity for a while. People mistook your patience for weakness because they don't understand restraint. They don't have it, so they can't recognize it. But the bigger observer recognized it immediately. Restraint is rare. Restraint is expensive. Restraint is what you get when someone has the ability to destroy and still chooses not to. Because they understand, attention is ammunition and the wrong targets are a waste of bullets. And yes, the bigger observer watched you too. Not because you're a suspect, but because you're the contrast. You're the control group. You're the person under pressure who didn't turn into poison. You had reasons to retaliate. You had proof. You could have gone public, scorched everything, and collected applause like a paycheck. But you didn't. You chose the move that terrifies weak people. Distance, growth, irrelevance as a weapon. You starved the obsession by refusing to feed it. So your instructions stay simple and clean. Do not feed them. No explanations. No setting the record straight essays. No subtle responses meant to sting. Don't post for them. Don't hint for them. Don't watch their stories to see if they noticed you not watching them. That's the trap. They want to keep you orbiting their chaos. Your power is in exit velocity. Your power is in becoming a dead end with a locked gate and no sign explaining why. They will try a last-minute apology that isn't an apology. Watch for the "I hope there's no bad blood" text. Watch for the "we should catch up" invitation. Watch for the nostalgia bait. I miss the old days. That's not love. That's damage control. That's someone trying to manufacture a friendly screenshot they can show later if their behavior ever comes back around. They'll manufacture innocence the same way they tried to manufacture evidence against you. Same playbook, different costume. Let them. People who build costumes forget the body underneath still moves the same. The bigger observer watches movement, not outfits. Underneath their rebrand is still the same need. Control, entitlement, and the urge to turn someone else's life into a hobby because their own life feels too empty to stare at. Concern doesn't coordinate. Concern doesn't recruit. Concern doesn't obsess at midnight like it's paid overtime. Now the obsession starts eating them from the inside. Every notification becomes suspicious. Every silence feels like exposure. Every delayed reply feels like judgment. They become the paranoid mess they tried to manufacture in you. And it works on them because they have something you didn't. Guilt. They remember the lines they crossed. They remember the jokes they made when they thought nobody serious was listening. They remember the private messages they would never want read out loud. So their minds do what guilty minds do. Rehearse, rewrite, and panic. And here's the quiet nightmare. The bigger observer doesn't need to drop the other shoe. It can let them live in uncertainty while it quietly adjusts variables. That's the harsh elegance of it. They'll experience a lifetime of almosts. Almost hired, almost promoted, almost invited, almost trusted, almost successful. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one too small to scream about. All of them together shaping a life that feels strangely cramped, like the walls moved in while they were busy watching you. At the same time, you start feeling a different kind of gravity. Not worship, not celebrity, just alignment, smoothness. Doors that open without begging, timing that works out. People who take you seriously without demanding you perform pain for credibility. You won't always know why. You don't need to. That's how real support looks. It doesn't require you to kneel for it. It shows up as quiet clearance, as space, as a path that stops feeling booby-trapped. Here's the twist they can't swallow. The bigger observer doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send warnings. It simply measures. It notices who keeps circling, who keeps tagging, who keeps asking questions that aren't theirs to ask. It notices the little campaigns, the coordinated concern, the timing of posts, the recycled narratives. Then it marks the pattern and quietly reroutes the environment around it. not by attacking them, by reducing their access. They call it bad luck. It's just the unspoken mathematics of consequence. And the moment they feel that shrink, they understand. They were never the hunters, just tracked. Because this was always about selection. You were being tested, yes, but so were they. And they failed loudly. They revealed they can't handle someone existing at a higher frequency without turning it into a project. They revealed they don't build, they monitor. They don't create, they consume. They don't improve, they compare. And comparison is the cheapest drug on the planet. It gives you a fake high with no effort, then leaves you shaking when the high runs out and the mirror turns back on. So here's the ending they don't get to control. You don't become a story they can narrate. You don't become a rumor they can manage. You become momentum. You become a person whose life is too full to stalk effectively. You become so disciplined that noise can't hook you. You become so selective that weak people can't even reach you to feel important. And when they finally understand that something big observed them first, that their obsession has been recorded in ways they can't edit, they will do the only thing they should have done at the start. Walk away and hope nobody remembers. Let them pretend. Their panic is not your responsibility. Their discomfort is not your burden. Your job is to keep your head down and your standards high. Keep moving. Keep building. Keep your boundaries quiet and absolute. Because the most violent thing you can do to someone who tried to own your attention is to live well without acknowledging their existence. So if you feel the air changing, don't mistake it for danger. That's space. That's pressure leaving the room. That's the part of your life that was being crowded by small people, finally opening up again. Let the silence return. Let the noise starve. Let the watchers learn the cruelest truth about you. You don't need to punish them. Reality will. And the moment they understand that something big observed them first, they'll finally grasp what you already knew in your bones. Your life was never their playground. They feel it before they admit it. Not in their logic, inside the part of them that still knows when it's being hunted. The atmosphere around you has shifted into something clean and cold. You're not shouting, not begging, not performing. You're simply moving with a calm that refuses to be negotiated. And that calm is making their demons sweat. Because nothing terrifies a manipulator like a target who stopped reacting on schedule. Their whole game was built on one sacred assumption. You would keep playing defense. They could jab, gossip, provoke, disrespect you, then watch you scramble to explain yourself like you were the one on trial. They loved the old you, who tried to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding. They loved the old you, who brought receipts to a rigged court, who wasted energy trying to make unfair people feel fair. But something in you got quiet in a different way. Not shut down, calibrated. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped arguing with the story they rehearsed about you. You stopped giving them your nervous system like a controller. And the moment you did, their strategy started collapsing. Now they don't know which version of you is walking into the room, because the version that used to explain itself is gone. Watch how they behave when they lose the ability to manage you. They escalate. They send the random message. They like the old post. They ask mutuals questions that sound casual, but smell like surveillance. They stage coincidences. They float bait. Then pretend it wasn't bait, hoping you'll bite so they can say, "See? You're the problem." When control is their oxygen, your independence feels like suffocation. And here's the cruel joke. You're not attacking them. You're just not available for their tactics anymore. Demons don't fear aggression. Demons fear clarity. Demons fear discipline. Demons fear someone who recognizes the pattern and refuses the dance. You're not trying to win arguments. You're trying to end the cycle. That's why their internal chaos leaks through their smiles. They used to read you like a manual. They knew what tone would make you doubt yourself, what rumor would make you defend your name, what compliment would soften you into giving access, what insult would make you chase validation. They studied you the way desperate people study a lock they plan to pick. And for a while, it worked, because you were human. You wanted peace. You wanted fairness. You wanted the benefit of the doubt to be real. Then you learned the difference between confusion and strategy. Some people don't misunderstand. They engineer. They don't want clarity. They want leverage. They don't want resolution. They want reactions. They don't want you healed. They want you manageable. So you stopped donating explanations to people who treat your words like weapons. You stopped negotiating with disrespect. You stopped translating your boundaries into language that feels comfortable to the person violating them. Now their masks slip in tiny ways. They talk too fast, like speed can replace substance. They smile too hard, like teeth can hide panic. They act unbothered while keeping receipts like a detective who suspects they're about to be exposed. They paint you as the villain because villains are useful. If they can make your confidence look dangerous, they can avoid looking at their own emptiness. If they can call you cold, they don't have to admit they depended on your warmth. And that's when the showdown starts approaching. Not the dramatic movie kind, but the real one, the quiet one, the kind that happens inside them when they realize you're not coming back to who you used to be. First they do denial. They call your evolution a phase. They tell themselves you'll soften, you'll miss them, you'll need their approval again. They wait. And while they wait, you keep building. You keep choosing yourself. You keep stacking small, boring wins that turn into permanent upgrades. The longer you keep moving, the more their denial erots into panic. Then comes projection. They accuse you of everything they're doing. They call you manipulative while trying to manipulate your reputation. They call you toxic while dripping poison into conversations. They call you obsessed while monitoring your progress like it's a job. They call you changed like it's a crime. Of course you changed. Change is what happens when you stop accepting crumbs from people who eat off your plate. When the old buttons don't work, they go for the last desperate move. They try to rewrite your identity. They bring up your past, your old reactions, your worst moments, the version of you that existed before you learned restraint. They freeze you in an old snapshot and point at it like evidence. Because if they can keep you stuck in that picture, they can pretend they're still ahead of you. But you're not arguing with their story. You're outgrowing it. You're becoming too consistent to smear, too disciplined to bait, too focused to chase approval. Your silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Your distance isn't pettiness, it's self-respect. And your calm is the most brutal thing you can do to a person who survives on your chaos. Calm is evidence. Calm is a verdict. Calm says, without words, you do not matter enough to disturb my peace. That sentence lands inside them like a brick. So their demons start sweating psychologically. Insecurity starts pacing. Envy starts rehearsing speeches. The need to be the main character starts throwing tantrums in private. The demon of control starts calling emergency meetings at 2:47 a.m., drafting messages, deleting messages, refreshing pages, trying to find a lever that still moves you. Because if they can't move you, they have to face the truth. Their power was your permission. And that's where the checkmate begins. Not with a loud attack. With boring discipline, checkmate is you not picking up. Checkmate is you not explaining. Checkmate is you not defending your name to people who are never committed to your truth. Checkmate is you not stepping into rooms where your spirit has to shrink. Checkmate is you choosing your future so consistently that their narrative can't keep up with your reality. Watch how they react to boring checkmate. They act like you switched up. They act like you're punishing them. No, you're just no longer donating your life to their entertainment. You're no longer volunteering as the emotional punching bag in their little circus. They feel the unavoidable showdown approaching because the only thing left for them is truth. They can't distract you. They can't confuse you. They can't guilt you back into your old role. They can't charm you into shrinking. So what's left? Accountability. And accountability is the opponent their demons never trained for. That's why the energy around you gets strange. You see micro-reactions, the way they scan your face to check if they still have access, the way compliments start sounding like negotiation, the way "I'm proud of you" starts sounding like "please don't leave me behind," the way their jokes get sharper when you're winning, because sarcasm is the only blade weak hands can hold. And you don't have to do anything. You keep being consistent. That's your new threat. Not rage, not revenge, consistency. Because consistency exposes people who rely on your inconsistency to survive. They try sympathy as a last angle. Suddenly they're tired. Suddenly they're going through so much. Suddenly they didn't mean it. Suddenly they need grace. Not because they're changing, but because you're leaving. They don't want forgiveness, they want access. And when you don't give it, they call you heartless. Let them. Heartless is what controlling people call you when they can't reach your heart anymore. Now the real showdown isn't even with them. It's with the part of you that used to crave closure. The part of you that wanted the perfect conversation where they finally understand. That part will try to drag you back into the ring. Because closure feels like justice. But justice isn't always a conversation. Sometimes justice is distance. Sometimes justice is never giving them a final scene. So you learn to live without their confession. You let them keep their story while you keep your life. You stop trying to win their understanding and start winning your days. And the darker irony is this. The more stable you become, the more unstable they get. Your peace triggers their chaos. Your boundaries trigger their desperation, because their game was timing and pressure, making you react first so they could blame you for reacting, provoking you into being messy so they could call you unstable, moving the goalposts and watching you chase them like a dog chasing a laser pointer. But you stopped chasing. You started watching. You started seeing who benefits when you shrink, who panics when you grow. You started protecting your energy like it's currency. You stopped giving them front row seats to your process. You moved quieter and cleaner, and you let outcomes speak in a language they can't interrupt. That's how you corner them in their own game. You remove yourself from every trap. You refuse to stand in the spot where they keep placing the knife. You recognize that some battles are won by not entering the arena at all. Without your participation, their power is imaginary. So they gather people like shields. They build little courtrooms where you're guilty by default. They try to make you defend yourself against a story that keeps changing. And you know what? Let them build it, because you're not showing up. You're not showing up to defend yourself against people who already chose not to see you. You're not showing up to explain boundaries to people who hear no as an insult. You're not showing up to debate your worth with people whose identity depends on you doubting it. And the moment you stop showing up, their narrative collapses under the weight of your results. They can't control you with stories when your life keeps contradicting them. Now the showdown feels unavoidable because for them, it is. They're not chasing you. They're chasing the version of you they could manage. They're chasing the reaction they used to get. And the more they chase, the more they reveal how small the whole thing always was. This is where you become dangerous in the cleanest way. You stop treating their behavior as personal and start treating it as predictable. You stop being offended and start being strategic. You stop hoping and start choosing. And your choices tighten the checkmate. You choose who gets access. You choose where your attention goes. You choose your peace over their approval. You choose to build a life that doesn't require their permission. You choose to become the kind of person their demons can't manipulate, because your identity isn't for sale. So let them feel the heat. Let their demons sweat. Let them sense the board closing in, move by move, day by day, boundary by boundary. The real win isn't watching them panic. The real win is watching you become someone who doesn't need their panic to prove anything. And if you're wondering what happens next, here's what they don't anticipate. When desperate players see the end coming, they don't bow out gracefully. They make one reckless move, one loud move, one last-ditch move that exposes everything they've been hiding. And that's exactly where this is headed. Because right before checkmate, the losing side always tries to flip the table and call it strategy. They don't accept endings. They don't respect boundaries. They don't exit with dignity. They don't say, okay, I lost. They say, let me do something so chaotic you'll forget I'm losing. And the best part? They do it on instinct. They don't even realize they're confessing. So the reckless move shows up wearing a disguise. It arrives as concern. It arrives as nostalgia. It arrives as a joke. It arrives as a, hey, stranger. It arrives as a sudden compliment from someone who used to starve you of basic respect. It arrives as a mutual friend randomly asking how you've been. It arrives as a coincidence that smells like planning. And you can feel it immediately, can't you? That tiny vibration in the air. That subtle shift where your nervous system goes, this isn't connection, this is reconnaissance. Because when people lose control of you, they don't suddenly develop genuine curiosity. They develop a mission. Here's what they're hoping for. One emotional reaction, one messy paragraph, one defensive tone, one why would you do that to me? One moment where you step back onto their stage and give them something they can edit, screenshot, misquote, and perform like evidence. They don't need truth. They need content. They need a clip. They need a moment they can replay to others and say, see, this is who they really are. But you don't give them a scene, because you finally understand the secret. The trap isn't the message. The trap is the role they're offering you inside the message. The role of the explainer, the role of the fixer, the role of the one who proves their goodness by tolerating disrespect. They want to pull you back into that costume, because in that costume, you're manageable. And that's why their demons sweat when you stay calm. Because calm means you can see the strings. So the first reckless move is usually a test. Something small, something plausibly deniable, something that gives them two exits. If you react, they say you're unstable. If you don't, they say you're cold. They call it checking in, but it's really checking if the old buttons still work. They toss a pebble at your window and listen for movement. And you, this upgraded version of you, doesn't move. You watch them try to manufacture a reaction like a desperate magician, performing the same trick to an audience that already saw The Wire. You watch them repeat the pattern: bait, guilt, charm, insult, confusion, sympathy. It's the same playlist, just remixed for whatever version of you they think you still are. But you're not that version. You're the version that sees through their tactics so clearly, it almost feels unfair. Almost. Except it's not unfair. It's just what happens when you stop being emotionally available to people who treat your emotions like a remote control. And now the energy changes, because when the small test fails, they escalate. They send the accidental message meant for someone else. The one that just happens to mention your name. The one that just happens to hint at drama. The one that just happens to look like a mistake but reads like a stage direction. Oops, wrong person, LOL. Yeah, totally. And I'm the CEO of Innocence. They do it because they want you to respond. They want you to ask questions. They want you to lean in. Curiosity is how they reopen the door. Confusion is how they enter. They don't need you to trust them. They just need you to engage. But you don't, because you've learned something brutal. The people who play mind games don't fear confrontation. They fear indifference. They can spin anger into a narrative. They can twist sadness into a weakness. They can weaponize your explanations. But indifference? Indifference gives them nothing to hold. So they start doing the one thing that always happens when control breaks. They recruit an audience. You'll notice it. Suddenly other people are involved. People who weren't there. People who don't have context. People who just want peace. People who don't want to pick sides, while somehow always repeating their side. They send flying monkeys with smiles and soft voices, like, hey, I don't know what happened, but they do know what happened. They know exactly what happened. They're just being paid in attention to pretend they don't. And your old self would have explained. Your old self would have tried to clarify. Your old self would have written a dissertation titled, Why I'm Not the Villain in Your Group Chat. Your old self would have fought for fairness in a room that profits off distortion. But your new self doesn't debate in bad faith courtrooms. You don't argue with people who get their information from someone committed to misunderstanding you. You don't perform innocence for a jury that was bribed with gossip. You don't chase approval from people who need you to be wrong so they can feel right. So you do something that feels almost illegal in today's world. You let them think what they want. You let them build theories. You let them tell stories. You let them pace. You let them spiral. And that's when the panic becomes visible. Because if you're not defending yourself, they can't read your position. If you're not responding, they can't measure your weakness. If you're not reacting, they can't time their next move. Your silence becomes a fog they can't map. That fog is terrifying to demons. Demons don't fear your anger. Demons fear your self-control. They fear the fact that you're not emotionally available for extraction. They fear the fact you're not easy anymore. So the next reckless move is the apology. Not a real apology, a performance apology. An apology with loopholes, an apology with conditions, an apology that starts with if or ends with but. an apology that somehow contains more blame than accountability. They'll say, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Translation, "I'm sorry you're inconvenient." They'll say, "I didn't know it hurt you." Translation, "I didn't care enough to check." They'll say, "I was going through a lot." Translation, "My pain gives me permission." They'll say, "Can we just move on?" Translation, "Can you stop remembering because I hate consequences?" And they're hoping your heart will do what it used to do. Rush in, accept crumbs, call it progress, reopen the door, restart the cycle. They're hoping your empathy will betray you. But it doesn't, because you finally learned the difference between compassion and access. You can forgive someone internally and still refuse to let them back into your life. You can understand their wounds without volunteering as their punching bag. You can wish them healing while still locking your door. And the moment you refuse the bait apology, their demons sweat harder, because now they realize you're not returning to the version of you that was easy to reset. So they try the opposite approach. They go cold. They go mean. They go dismissive. They go for the ego shot. They throw a subtle insult meant to sting. They bring up your past. They do that thing where they pretend they're the mature one while doing the most immature behavior in the building. They act like you're too much, because calling you too much is easier than admitting they were too little. And you watch it like you're watching a predictable movie. You recognize the strategy. If love doesn't pull you back, shame will. If apology doesn't reopen the door, provocation will. If softness doesn't work, cruelty will. Because their demons only know two tools: seduce or attack. But you're not seduced, and you're not attacked. You're calibrated. Here's the part nobody tells you. Once you stop reacting, the manipulator begins reacting to you. They become the emotional one. They become the frantic one. They become the inconsistent one. They start telling on themselves. They'll post indirectly. They'll talk louder around mutual spaces. They'll perform happiness like it's a threat. They'll say your name in rooms you're not in. Like chanting, it will summon your attention. They'll obsess over your energy, your attitude, your change. Because they need a reason for your boundaries that doesn't involve their behavior. And you'll notice something darkly funny. They'll act like you're doing this to them. Like your healing is an attack. Like your standards are violence. Like your peace is disrespect. Because in their world your role was to be available. To be easy. To be forgiving on command. To be warm even when they were cold. To be patient even when they were reckless. Your boundaries are a betrayal of the contract they wrote in their head. So they start feeling cornered, not because you're threatening them, but because their usual exits are closing. Their lies don't land the same. Their smear campaign can't keep up with your consistency. Their "I'm the victim" storyline gets weak when you're not chasing them. And here comes the part that makes the showdown unavoidable. They can't control you privately anymore, so they try to control you publicly. This is when they start planting narratives, small ones at first. They've been acting weird. They're different now. They think they're better than everyone. They're cold. They're arrogant. They're fake. Classic vocabulary. It's always the same language used to punish someone who refuses access. They do it to protect their ego. Yes, but also to test the environment. They want to see who will echo it, who will support them, who will join the crowd. They're building a social cage around you, hoping you'll panic and shrink yourself back down just to escape the pressure. But you don't shrink. And that's when your checkmate starts tightening in ways they can't even understand. Because you're not trying to win popularity contests. You're trying to win your life back. You stop feeding the rumor mill by starving it. You stop rewarding disrespect by removing your presence. You stop explaining yourself to people who only listen so they can reply. And now, the board is closing. Because the more they escalate, the more they expose themselves. Their concern becomes obsession. Their curiosity becomes surveillance. Their boundaries become control attempts. Their peacekeeping becomes manipulation. And the most humiliating part for them? You're not even fighting. You're just not available. That's why they feel the showdown approaching. Because at some point, when someone keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, the only thing left is a consequence. Not a conversation, not a warning. A consequence. And you, this version of you, does consequences differently. You don't threaten. You don't announce. You don't scream about what you're going to do. You don't give them a preview. You just change the rules of access, quietly, cleanly, permanently. Now let's talk about the psychological chokehold you've accidentally created. When a manipulator loses you, they don't just lose a person. They lose a mirror. They lose a stage. They lose a role that made them feel powerful. They lose the ability to regulate their emotions by disrupting yours. They lose their favorite drug, your attention, so they start twitching. They'll check your socials more often than they check their own goals. They'll ask about you like it's just curiosity, but it's interrogation with a smile. They'll pretend they're over it while keeping files in their mind like a detective who refuses to close the case. They'll compare themselves to you in private, then hate you for the math. And here's where the chaotic humor creeps in. They'll start trying to compete with you in categories you didn't even sign up for. Suddenly they're leveling up, too. Suddenly they're posting motivational quotes. Suddenly they're in their healing era. Suddenly they're unbothered. It's adorable in the same way a toddler wearing a suit is adorable. Respectfully, the suit is still full of tantrums. They'll mimic your posture, copy your language, steal your vibe, then accuse you of changing when you don't respond to the imitation. Because your aura is the only thing in their life that felt like power. And now they're trying to counterfeit it. But here's what they can't counterfeit: discipline, consistency, integrity. The quiet self-respect that doesn't need applause. So the imitation fails, and the demons sweat harder. Now their final move gets closer. The real reckless move, the one that exposes everything. It's usually one of these. They try to bait you into a public confrontation so they can look like the victim. They send someone close to you to extract information. They manufacture a crisis to pull your empathy back into service. They drop a rumor so outrageous you feel forced to defend yourself. They accidentally leak a private thing so you'll panic. They attempt a power play, an ultimatum, a threat. A statement meant to corner you into choosing between your peace and your reputation. Because when the board is closing, they don't try to win gracefully. They try to cause damage. But you've been studying. You've been watching patterns, not personalities. You've been tracking behavior, not promises. You've been noticing what triggers them, what calms them, what makes them reveal themselves. And now you're positioned to do something they don't expect. You don't fight their move directly. You redirect it into a trap of their own making. This is the part where your calm becomes surgical. You realize the highest level of power isn't yelling louder. It's making their next step cost them something. It's letting them walk into their own contradiction. It's watching them overplay their hand while you do nothing but hold your boundary. Because boundaries do something beautiful. They force the other person to show their character. If you say no and they respect it, they're safe. If you say no and they punish you, they were never safe. So you say no to the bait. No to the apology with conditions. No to the just talk request that's really let me back in. No to the triangulation. No to the flying monkeys. No to the guilt. No to the rewriting of your story. No to the forced showdown on their terms. And the second you say no, their demons start pleading. Not out loud, not in words, in behavior. They try to punish you into compliance. They try to starve you into returning. They try to shame you into being small again. They try to teach you a lesson for having self-respect. But you don't learn that lesson anymore. You learned a different one. People who love you don't need you to be smaller to feel bigger. People who respect you don't ask for access while disrespecting your boundaries. People who are healthy don't panic when you grow. So what happens as the showdown approaches? You become boringly unstoppable. You stop checking for their reactions. You stop caring about their private opinions. You stop moving based on their mood. You stop letting their projections define your identity. And that's the quiet checkmate. You become unhookable. This is why they feel cornered in their own game. Because their game requires hooks. Their game requires you to care. Their game requires you to chase. Their game requires you to explain. Their game requires you to doubt yourself. But you've removed the hooks. So all they have left is noise, and noise doesn't work on a person who is committed to peace. Now here's where part 2 turns into a blade. You start recognizing that the showdown isn't something you have to fear. It's something you can control. Because the showdown is not a screaming match. It's a moment of truth. A moment where the mask slips so hard it can't be put back on. And you can feel that moment approaching like pressure in the air. They'll do one final probe, one final accidental contact, one final attempt to make you react. And you won't react. You'll respond with structure. You'll respond with a boundary so clear it doesn't invite debate. You'll respond with distance so final it doesn't leave hope. You'll respond with a move that makes their next move impossible without exposing their intentions. That's what checkmate really is. Not beating them harder, removing their options. And the more you remove options, the more frantic they get. You'll watch it. They start contradicting themselves. They start slipping timelines. They start saying things that don't align. They start moving emotionally while pretending they're logical. They start leaking their obsession in casual conversations. They start revealing that they know details they shouldn't know because they've been watching. And you don't even need to accuse them. You just let them talk. You just let them over-explain. Because people who are lying always over-talk when they feel the truth closing in. They pile words on top of words like a blanket, hoping coverage becomes credibility. They act offended at questions you didn't ask. They defend themselves from accusations you didn't make. You don't have to be a genius to see it. You just have to be calm enough to notice. So you stay calm. You keep building your life. You keep moving forward without checking behind you every 2 seconds. And that's when it hits them. You're not watching them anymore. They used to feel like the observer, the judge, the one in control. Now they feel like the one being left behind, like the one being measured and found lacking. And this is where their demons sweat the hardest, right before the final move, because they feel the humiliation of powerlessness. They can't reach you. They can't read you. They can't bait you. They can't guilt you. They can't shame you. They can't charm you. So they do what cornered egos always do. They make one last loud move. The kind of move that's designed to force your hand. A public statement, a sudden confrontation, a threat disguised as truth. A dramatic gesture meant to drag you back into the arena. And for a second, the old instinct tries to rise. Defend yourself. Explain. Correct the record. Prove you're not who they said you are, but you don't. Because you remember the rule. You don't wrestle in mud with people who trained for it. You make one clean move instead. Not emotional, not reactive. A move so precise it feels like you already saw it coming. You shift your position on the board in a way that turns their loud move into a spotlight on their own intentions. You let their aggression become their confession. You let their truth bomb become proof of obsession. You let their attempt to corner you become the moment they corner themselves. And that's where the showdown becomes unavoidable. Not because you're going to fight them, but because they're about to expose themselves, trying to force you to. Because here's what they still don't understand. The board has already changed. The rules aren't the same. You're not playing for validation anymore. You're playing for freedom. And when you play for freedom, you don't need to win debates. You need to remove access. You need to choose yourself. You need to keep moving. So when their final loud move comes, and it will, you'll be ready, not with rage, but with a boundary that locks like steel. You'll watch them step forward with their practiced script, expecting the old you to appear like a puppet on cue. And instead they'll meet the version of you that doesn't argue. The version of you that ends cycles. The version of you that doesn't give them a final scene. And the second they realize that, you'll see it in their eyes. The panic, the heat, the sweating demons, the internal screaming. Because the next move you make won't be a reply. It'll be a consequence, not a speech, not a paragraph, not a let me explain. Just a clean, quiet action that changes the shape of their access forever. One door you stop opening, one number you stop answering, one invitation you stop entertaining. And suddenly, their entire final move lands in an empty room, echoing back at them like a joke told to an audience that already left. That's the moment the board freezes. In their head, the showdown was supposed to be dramatic. They wanted you to flinch. They wanted the old you to show up so they could twist, edit, weaponize, and walk away smiling like they won. But you don't give them emotion. You give them absence. And absence is the one language their demons can't negotiate with. You can almost hear the gears grind inside them. Their script has no line for a person who won't argue. Their playbook has no chapter for someone who refuses to be baited. They try to escalate, but there's nowhere to climb when you're not standing on their ladder. They try to shame you, but shame can't stick to someone who stopped needing approval. They try to recruit people, but your silence makes their recruiting look like exactly what it is, a desperate search for witnesses. And here's the dark comedy. While they're scrambling to win, you're just living. While they're writing narratives, you're writing outcomes. While they're running PR, you're building peace. They're sweating over optics. You're investing in reality. They wanted a showdown like a movie. You turned it into a policy change. Because consequences aren't emotional, they're structural. You don't scream at a leaking pipe. You shut the valve. You don't debate with a fire. You remove oxygen. You don't negotiate with a pattern. You exit the loop. And once you exit, the loop exposes itself, spinning loudly with nobody inside it. That's when they realize the worst truth for a control-addicted person. They can't punish you into staying. Now watch what happens right after you lock the boundary. They'll try to act like they don't care. Then they'll check if you noticed. They'll try to look unbothered. Then they'll send a message designed to bother you. They'll pretend they're over it. Then they'll bring you up in conversations like a ritual. It's not even anger at this point. It's withdrawal. You were their supply. Your reactions were their proof of power. That's why their demons sweat. Because without you, they have to sit with themselves. No mirror to distort, no target to blame, no drama to outsource their emptiness onto. Just the quiet realization that the chaos they threw at you was never about you. It was about how they managed their insecurity by trying to manage you. And here's where your checkmate becomes undeniable. You don't need to expose them publicly. You don't need to prove anything. Their behavior does it for you. The more they push, the more obvious they become. The more they talk, the more they contradict themselves. The more they chase, the more they reveal the obsession. You don't have to fight their demons. You just stop feeding them. So the showdown happens, but not the way they imagined. It happens in that single moment when you choose your dignity over the dopamine of a reply. When you choose your future over the temporary satisfaction of clapping back. When you choose peace over performance. That choice is the blade. That choice is the lock. That choice is the end of the game. And they will feel it instantly. Not because you announce it, but because their access evaporates. Their influence dies. Their buttons stop working. Their final move hits nothing. They stand there with a handful of tactics and no target, realizing you didn't just dodge their last-ditch play. You removed the entire arena. So let them call it cold. Let them call it arrogance. Let them call it changed. Of course you changed. You evolved past being controllable. You became the kind of person their demons can't touch, because your identity isn't up for negotiation anymore. You're not here to be understood by people who profit off misunderstanding. You're here to be free. And when they finally accept that the board is closed, that the checkmate is real, they'll have one final revelation. The scariest thing about you was never your anger. It was your discipline, the quiet decision to stop participating, the calm refusal to give them a final scene, the consequence that didn't scream, just ended everything. And you'll keep walking, not because you won, but because you remember what this was always about. Not defeating them, but escaping them. And that's why their demons sweat. Because you didn't fight to survive. You moved to rule your own mind. That's the checkmate. Quiet, final, permanent, clean.